Well, here we go with square roots. I'm hoping that I can get through this presentation without my board dying on me, so bear with me. We're gonna be talking about square roots today. And so there was a video before this talking about square roots and perfect squares. So if you need to go watch that, that would be helpful before you see this one. But basically what that one said is, if we're taking a number and we're squaring it, then m is the square root of n. So if I took a number such as 5, squared it, and I got 25, then 5 is the square root of 25. So whatever number you square to get this makes that number this number's square root. So the symbol that we use looks like this. And there's a button on your calculator. We'll talk about it in a minute. A perfect square, which they talked about in the video prior to this, is any number that has a whole number as its square root. So you should become familiar with the perfect squares between 1 and 100. But I am giving you a chart on top of that, so you don't have to memorize them. You can just look at that chart. But every number has a square root. It's just sometimes they're decimals, and we're only interested in perfect square roots, which are whole numbers at this point. So I did share this with you on your Schoology page in this folder. And these are the perfect squares from 1 to 100. So if I took 1 and squared it, I would get 1. If I took 2 and squared it, I'd get 4. 3, I would get 9, and so forth. What this also means is that if I took this number and took the square root of it, which is this symbol, I would get the other side of 2. And I think I have that chart farther down in this presentation. But a square root is basically the number that you get, or excuse me, the number that you use to multiply by itself to get that other number. So 5 times 5 is 25. That means 5 is its square root. There's also a button on your calculator. So if you have a calculator that looks like mine, you should get it out. The other ones operate a little differently, and I would like you to have one like this. But the way calculators are set up is generally the buttons that undo each other are right with each other. So if I look at this squared button right here, right above it is the square root, because these two things are the opposites of each other, or inverses. So if I wanted to get to this square root button, I would have to hit my second. And then see, it'll put a little second up there, and I can hit the squared key, and then I get my square root symbol. So if I wanted to find the square root of 25, I would just put that in there. Notice where this is blinking. Because we're not doing anything else, you can just leave it there, or you can tap it out. And if I hit enter, I get 5, because 5 times 5 is 25. So if I tap this again, do my square root, let's pick one. How about 81? So think in your head, what times itself gives me 81? Well, that's going to be a 9. So 9 times 9 is 81, so 9 is the square root of 81. Again, I have these charts for you, so you can see those here, but I also have them in reverse here. So if I'm looking for what the square root of this number is, the square root of 9 is 3, because 3 times 3 is 9. And so the square root of 36 is 6, because 6 times 6 is 36. So if you don't want to use your calculator, and you're welcome to, you can use these charts also. So let's look back at this one. So 36, this is that square root or radical symbol they call it. What is the square root of 36? Well, think to yourself, and you wouldn't even have to use your calculator necessarily, what times itself gives me 36? In other words, what number squared gives me 36? And you should get 6. We just did 81, so what number times itself gives me 81? That would be a 9. What number times itself gives me 64? You should get 8. And then what number times itself gives me 49? You should get 7. So basically, these are kind of opposites of each other. We're going to move down to this one, because not well, this is solving equations with square roots. So this is basically that thought process that we just did on the previous slide. So I'm thinking to myself, if b squared is 64, then the square root of 64 is b. So if I'm looking at this one, I'm thinking to myself, what number, if I square it, which means multiply it by itself, gives me 64? Well, that's going to be 8, because 8 squared is 64. Then that means the square root of 64 is 8. You have a couple like that on your homework, and you have one that looks like this on your homework too. We're going to be taking 6 and plugging it in here where A is, and we're going to be taking 3 and plugging it in here where B is. Let's move this over a little bit. So I've got my square root, or my radical sign. A is 6, so I'm going to plug that right in here. B is 3, so I'm going to plug that right in. And then I'm going to do the math. 6 squared, or 6 times 6, is 36. And 3 times 3, because it's squared, is 9. So 36 minus 9. And then I'm going to take the square root of it. So 36 times 9, let me write the square root like this. And that's actually not going to end up nicely. It's going to end up at 27. And 27 is not a perfect square, so we're actually just going to leave that like that. But I do want to estimate these. So let's look at that in a different slide. So I have the square root of 27, and I can't think of any number that times, when I multiply it by itself, gives me 27. But I know that if I took 5 and squared it, I would get 25, and that's pretty close. And then if I took on the other side 6 and squared it, I would get 36. So that means the square root of 27 lies somewhere between 5 and 6. 27 is closer to 5. So that means the square root of 27 is going to be closer to 5 than it is to 6. So estimation-wise, I'm just going to say it's approximately 5. So we'll do another one. You can use these charts, so I'll flip back and forth with the charts. So let's do the square root of, let's do 52. I can't think of any number that when I multiply it by itself gives me 52. So I'm going to come back to this and look for where 52 is between. 52 is between 49 and 64, which means its square root is going to be somewhere between 7 and 8. So when I go back to here, I know it's going to be somewhere between 7 and 8. If I took 7 and squared it, I get 49. If I take 8 and square it, I get 64. Well, 52 is closer to 49 than it is to 64. So the approximate square root of 52 is 7. We're just going to round to the nearest whole number. Watch this a couple of times. Use this chart to estimate. And then we're always going to estimate to the nearest whole number. So decide which perfect square is on either side and pick the one that it's closest to. I hope this helps. If you have any questions, reach out to me. Remember, don't wait till you're sitting in front of me. Reach out if you have a question before you come to class, and we'll address it when you get here. Thanks.